Everyone's afraid of something. The dentist, taxes, the dark, even broccoli. Yuck. We all have something that keeps us up at night. And honestly, some things are scary. The good news is that with God, we don't have to be as afraid. With God on our side, we can fear less.
Today we are wrapping up a series that has explored some of the fears and anxieties we face in life. As part of the journey, we've been reminded that no matter how deep our faith may be, there is no way to live a life free of fear. That's not realistic. So our goal has not been to discover ways we can be fearless, but to find ways we can fear less. To turn down the fears and anxieties we have so that we can live a more abundant life. We're going to wrap things up by talking about two of the biggest fears we can face: serious illness and death. When I was 14 years old, I started feeling sick late one evening. Within a couple of hours, things got bad enough that my mother and stepfather took me to the hospital. After several tests, the doctors were unable to arrive at a diagnosis, so they admitted me for observation. By the next day, things had gotten a lot worse. Still unsure what was going on, the surgeon recommended an exploratory abdominal surgery to see what was happening. I am so glad he did. As it turns out, my appendix was infected and had perforated, causing the infection to spread. They removed it and cleaned things up as best they could, but I was not in good shape. I spent the next week in the hospital and the next several weeks recovering at home. Additional complications led to another hospital stay, and I eventually had to have another surgery. That experience didn't just lead to physical scars, it led to some mental and emotional ones as well. To this day, if I get any kind of abdominal pain that hangs around too long, I start to wonder what's going on. Now, rationally, I know it's not my appendix. After all, that thing is gone. But when it comes to the fear of serious illness, we aren't always rational. And if you are like me, sometimes you make the mistake of visiting Dr. Google. Typing your symptoms into an internet search bar is rarely helpful and usually just leads you down some pretty scary rabbit holes. Part of what is happening to me when I feel that twinge in my gut is something we've talked about earlier in this series. Our bodies are designed to alert us to anything that might be a threat to our well-being. This response, sometimes called the fight or flight response, is centered in a part of our brain called the amygdala and is a biological reaction that helps us to stay alive. The problem is that sometimes our amygdala fires off a false alarm. This is especially true when we have had some kind of experience in the past that has left an impression on us emotionally. That's why it's not uncommon for people who have had a significant illness or injury, or who have cared for someone who has been in that situation, to get anxious or afraid when there is even a hint of something similar happening again. Of course, you don't have to have had a first-hand experience to grow fearful of becoming ill. After all, we are constantly bombarded with messages that warn of potential illness and the risks we face. If you watch any amount of cable TV, you will see multiple pharmaceutical commercials promising to cure whatever ails you. Of course, to make the sale, they've got to talk about all kinds of diseases and their symptoms. Before you know it, you're starting to scan your body. You're thinking, maybe my eye is a little dry. Maybe I am starting to forget things. And yeah, my joints are hurting a bit more than usual. Another way our fears around serious illness get amped up is the way people interpret the data regarding how diseases can impact our lives. For example, let's talk about cancer. Few things strike more fear in people than that of getting a diagnosis of cancer. According to the American Cancer Society, over the course of a lifetime, approximately 42% of men and 40% of women will be diagnosed with some form of cancer. Men have about a 1 in 5 chance of dying of cancer. Women have about a 1 in 6 chance. When reported in these ways, and it often is, diagnosis and death rates from cancer can feel high, and that can heighten our fears. But when looked at from a different perspective, when the same data is presented in another way, things start to feel less frightening. For example, the percentage of men who will die of cancer is about 19%. For women, it is about 17%. If you are a non-smoker, that risk drops even more. This means that out of every 100 men, 81 will not die of cancer. Out of every 100 women, 83 will not die of cancer. And again, if you are a non-smoker, those risks are even less. And the odds of dying of cancer before the age of 60 are really small, like less than 1%. That doesn't mean it doesn't happen. There are exceptions, and if you or a loved one is that exception, the odds don't matter. My father died of colon cancer at 55. That puts me at a higher risk for the disease. So one of the things I do to turn down my fears around that is to make sure I get regular colonoscopies. I've had 2 so far, and will get another one later this year. And while I'm a proud Swede, my Nordic ancestry gave me really pale skin. So I go to the dermatologist on a regular basis to check for any potential skin cancers. Getting regular medical care is one of the best ways to turn down our fears around getting sick. A relationship with a doctor also makes it easier for us to get the facts about any concerns we may have, which is way better than anything we can get from Dr. Google. And while sickness can still happen, regardless of our efforts, doing our best to live in healthy ways does reduce our risks and can help us turn down some of our fears of serious illness. The vast majority of us will spend most of our lives in at least relatively good health. Yes, we will get sick, and some of those illnesses will be serious. That is part of life. But my hope is that by doing what we can to turn down our fears of that, we can live a more abundant life and enjoy the healthy or healthier days that we have. While fears of serious illness are commonplace, the fear of death can be even more pervasive. A lot of people are afraid of what happens after we die, and just as many, if not more, are worried about how we will die. Ed Dobson, a pastor who chronicled his journey with ALS, also known as Lou Gehrig's disease, summed up this fear in a way I will never forget when he said, "It's not the being dead I'm worried about. It's the getting dead that scares me." I get that. The end-of-life journey can encompass a range of experiences. Some deaths are peaceful, others are not. Some are sudden, others can take time. And there is no way of knowing for certain which path we will take. That said, I want to offer what I hope will be at least some comfort regardless of what our path may be. As part of my ministerial training, I worked as a chaplain at a hospice and at a hospital that was a level 1 trauma center, which means it was equipped to handle the most severe forms of trauma. While those settings varied greatly, one thing was constant. When a life was coming to its end, regardless of the cause, the care provided by the medical staff was always inspiring to me. When it was clear that someone's life was ending, the compassion that was offered made such a difference. In hospice care, death is seen as part of life, and every effort is made to make it as pain-free and peaceful as possible, while also allowing for deeply meaningful moments for patients and their loved ones. I am so grateful for the hospice movement and how it has grown in our country. If you or a loved one are nearing the end of your life, I encourage you to consider seeking hospice care. Allowing them to walk alongside you is a good way to turn down some of our fears about the end-of-life experience. Another thing that can turn down our fears about dying is to do some end-of-life planning. Making sure you have things like a will or trust, a living will or advance directive, so that loved ones and medical staff will know your desires around treatment. And you might also want to consider life insurance. If you have children or other dependents, having an established plan for their care can be a big relief. While it's not always the easiest thing to talk about, making end-of-life plans about our medical care, as well as other legal or financial plans, really can help reduce our fears. As for what happens after we die, we have been given the following promise by Jesus. Do not let your hearts be troubled. Believe in God. Believe also in me. In God's house there are many dwelling places. If it were not so, would I have told you that I go to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and will take you to myself, so that where I am, there you may be also. I not only believe this promise is true, but I am also counting on it. And when I feel the fear of what happens next popping up in my mind, I return to this promise, and it brings me some peace. And while I can't prove the existence of heaven, I've seen enough to believe that there is something more, something beyond the veil of this life. And I'm not in a hurry to experience it, but I'm trusting in that promise. And again, it's a great comfort to me. I want to close by showing you this picture. It is a clay jar that dates to around the time when Jesus was alive. Jars like this were very common in the ancient world, and they served a variety of important functions. However, because they were made of clay, they were fragile. They wore down over time and often broke apart. Speaking to fears about suffering and death that were being expressed by the members of the church in Corinth, the Apostle Paul used the familiarity of clay pots to help turn down those fears. He did so by likening the human body to those earthen vessels, saying that over time, our bodies will wear down, they will break, and they will no longer be what they once were. But while our bodies are temporary vessels, they hold within them a treasure, an eternal spirit that is from God, a spirit that cannot die, but will live forever. So even when our bodies suffer, even when we die, life is still at work in us. Paul then writes these words, "So we do not lose heart, even though our outer nature is wasting away. Our inner nature is being renewed day by day. For our slight, momentary affliction is producing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all measure. Because we look not at what can be seen, but at what cannot be seen. For what can be seen is temporary, but what cannot be seen is eternal." While I wish our bodies were a little less like clay pots, we can't change that. Part of life is that these vessels in which we live are temporary. They will not last forever. That means we will experience sickness, we will experience death. But while our bodies are temporary vessels, what they hold is eternal. And the promise of our faith is that when the temporary vessel fails, our spirits will rise. They will be united once again with God and with those who have gone before us. While that promise may not take away all our fears around serious illness and death, I hope it helps to turn those fears down at least a little bit so that we can better enjoy the life we have. Amen.